If you have been watching the congressional hearings into what led up to the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, then you have no doubt seen South Bay Congresswoman Representative Zoe Lofgren running the show for the most part, and she took a little time out today to join us. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. If you could just give us your take on how the hearings have been going so far.
Well, I think we've been clear about what has happened. And obviously, there's more to come. We've compiled a great deal of evidence and testimony, but we went through how former President Trump really apparently planned to lie and claim the election was rigged, in his words, well before the election occurred, in case he lost. And then, of course, he went in with these false claims of fraud. And we had all of this testimony from his own people, his attorney general, his campaign staff. They were all Republicans. They were all Trump supporters, telling him these claims had been investigated and they weren't true. There was no evidence for them. But despite that, he kept saying over and over again that they were true in his public statements and in his fundraising, really whipping up a mob that showed up on January 6th to try and overturn the election.
Now, speaking of fundraising, you were very critical about how he used some of that. You call it a big fraud, that he used some of these claims, according to some of the experts that you talked with, to get more campaign money and then funneled that into some of his own personal dealings.
Well, he asked people to donate to an election defense fund that did not exist, and peddled the fraud lies and raised hundreds of millions of dollars from his supporters who believed him. I think the average donation was under $20. These were donors, not rich, but they responded to his appeal, which were fraudulent. And I don't think that's right. The funds were spent on other things. They weren't spent on litigation or to defend the election in any way. And of course, now they've gone into his super PAC, which has used funds to, they paid part of the January 6th rally costs. Money was funneled into his former chief of staff, Mr. Meadows, and to entities that employed unemployed Trump people from the White House, not what donors were told.
Now, some of these allegations could rise to a criminal charge in some venues, but that's not what you're going for here, from what I understand. What is the end game?
Well, we're a legislative committee, and we've got two tasks. The first assignment was to find out all the facts that we could about what happened on January 6th and the events leading up to January 6th. And so that's the hearings that we're having now, telling people what we've found so far. And then the other is to make recommendations for various legislative changes that would make it less likely that something like this could happen again. We're working on that as well behind the scenes. We're not a prosecutor, we're a legislative committee. People are asking, was a crime committed? Well, it's worth remembering that Federal District Court Judge Carter, in an evidentiary case, reached the conclusion that it was more likely than not that the president committed fraud and committed a crime. That was a district court judge. That's his opinion. It's not something that the committee legally is charged with deciding.
No, correct me if I'm wrong. You could make a recommendation to the Justice Department to potentially pursue something like that.
We could. There's actually no official procedure for doing that. The committee could write a letter and say, here's the evidence. We haven't really, as a committee, discussed that yet, and I don't think we would until all the hearings are concluded. It's really entirely up to the Department of Justice. They are supposed to make their own independent judgment of whether a crime is committed and whether they can prove it. So we'll see what they do.
Speaking of the committee itself, there's been a lot of criticism of the makeup of the committee. It's certainly more Democrats than Republicans. Is that fair?
I don't think so. I mean, the ratio of Democrats to Republicans is honestly not that far off from other committees. For example, the House Administration Committee that I chair has, I think, 6 Democrats and 3 Republicans. So this has, a similar ratio. Now, the Republican leader, Mr. McCarthy, recommended a number of people, 2 of whom were not suitable. One is a witness, and we've asked him to come in and testify. It's really not appropriate for the witness to the event to be part of the team, and the other really is a denier of facts. But the other recommendations were acceptable. And when the speaker said, these 2 are problematic, Mr. McCarthy withdrew all of his nominations. And so we have 2 Republicans on the committee who are very, very conservative. I mean, if you overlapped my voting record and theirs, it would be very little overlap. I mean, but they are committed to finding the truth about this, and they're committed to defending the Constitution. So there's been a unity here that you don't always see on congressional committees. We're not sniping at each other. We're trying to find out what happened.
Now, speaking of your background personally, you have quite a background when it comes to presidential scandals, including being involved in several impeachment hearings over your career. What are you bringing to the table from a historical perspective into these hearings?
Well, I was just a young person, a law student, when I was on the staff of Congressman Don Edwards, who served on the Judiciary Committee during the Nixon impeachment, and in fact ended up writing one of the articles at the last minute when the committee's proceedings just began. I was a member of the Judiciary Committee during the Clinton impeachment, and of course a member of the committee when President Trump was impeached twice, and an impeachment manager for the first impeachment. So yes, you're right. I've been through a number of these. This is a very different proceeding. I would say that I've never been involved in an investigation as wide-ranging and as in-depth as this has been. It's been quite an education, frankly.
Now, speaking of education, there's also been a lot of talk about what led up to this, and this could have been prevented from a security standpoint. And House leadership has been criticized when it comes to that. We should have seen this coming, should have called out the National Guard earlier. I know you were also involved in a committee that was looking into that and dealing with Capitol Police. What was your takeaway there?
Well, it's funny because when the Republicans, not all of them obviously, but the Republican leaders trying to spin this as somehow not the fault of the president, when clearly it was. And he said so himself right after January 6th. Weirdly enough, the Capitol Police are not governed or run by the leadership in the House and Senate. There is a Capitol Police Board, and the Capitol Police Board is made up of the architect of the Capitol and the Sergeant at Arms of the House and Senate. As it turns out, each one of those individuals on January 6th had been appointed by Republicans. President Trump appointed the architect of the Capitol. Mitch McConnell had appointed the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate, and Paul Ryan had appointed the Sergeant at Arms of the House. They clearly they messed up. There's no question about it. There was deficiencies in the intelligence, but the lack of preparation did not cause the riot. The riot was caused by the great lie and the efforts to overturn the election. So we've had 6 hearings in the House Administration Committee on the various missteps by the Capitol Police. And we also have taken a very good look, and that'll be covered in another hearing, about the mistakes made in the Department of Defense. But that, those are important, but they didn't cause the riot.
All right. And we're also going forward talking about the next hearing has been postponed. That was scheduled for Wednesday. Do we have any reason for that?
It's not a policy reason. It has to do with some scheduling conflicts, as well as some a need for technical staff to be able to pull together. I mean, there is a mountain of video evidence. So it's witnesses, it's preparation, both technical and putting together the elements. So it's not a policy problem.
Okay, so what can we expect going forward on some of the future hearings?
Well, we have a hearing on this Thursday where we will take a look at the pressure applied to state officials to try and overturn the election. And then, of course, the hearing that was going to be Wednesday is probably going to be next week. It's the best guess. And that has to do with efforts to corrupt the Department of Justice to overturn the election. And we have several others. So we have a lot more to say. We won't be able to present everything that we've found. I mean, we've interviewed more than 1,000 people, and obviously you can't put that amount of evidence in a 2-hour hearing. So we will have a complete report in the fall, but we think it's important to let the public know what we've found so far in these set of hearings.
Now, before I let you go, I do want to touch on that a little bit. I think the people who have been watching these hearings are upset about what has gone on, what has been allowed to go on. And then you look for a resolution, you look for what's next or somebody to be punished. It doesn't seem like that's really going to come out of these hearings, but you are talking about the potential of policy change. So what are we talking about specifically there?
You know, we don't know. I mean, the Attorney General said he and the prosecutors are watching all the hearings. I was surprised by that. We're going to make all this evidence available to them. And again, they have to make an independent decision on what, if anything, to do. One of the things that we're looking at, and actually Liz Cheney and I have put in a significant amount of work to proposals to change the Electoral Count Act so that it couldn't be misused in this way. Again, that's one possible change. We're also looking at some other procedures that might make sure that we would be safer. For example, the District of Columbia, unlike states, the mayor can't call in the National Guard. That has been it's the President of the United States who can call in the Guard. The President long ago, by rule, has delegated that to the Defense Department, but it's really bureaucratic. And I think we might want to take a look at how to streamline that so if there's a need for resources, they can be deployed promptly.
Okay, we will be watching as this goes forward. Thank you so much for making time for us today. Representative Zoe Lofgren of the South Bay, we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.